Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the complete history of Elden Ring. In this series, we break down Elden Ring's lore and backstory from the earliest roots of the world down to the game's multiple endings. Before I get started, I just want to thank everyone who helped me along the road to making this video. This includes my fellow content creators, lore enthusiasts, and other people who enjoy this game a little too much. I also want to thank you for watching. This video marks the first in our series covering the entire history of the Lands Between in depth, so it's pretty exciting to break new ground on my channel. So for this first video, we have to get some basic but fundamental information out of the way before we construct any kind of timeline or history. These are concepts that might not naturally come up in a chronological order, and it'll be easier to discuss them later if we explore them now early on. So today, we're discussing the Outer Gods, the Greater Will, and the world of Elden Ring. Throughout the entirety of Elden Ring, the term Outer God is only used 8 times, which might seem surprising for a concept that has such an apparently significant influence on this world. However, when taken in the scope of Elden Ring's story and lore, the Outer Gods actually play a relatively minor role. So, how do we define the term Outer God? Well, based on a few item descriptions, we can say for certain that Outer Gods rarely, if ever, manifest themselves in the Lands Between, instead acting through envoys and acts of communion. The Outer God of Rot appears to have manifested in some form at one time as an ancient god, which was later sealed into the Lake of Rot. But whether this god is truly the Outer God or simply an envoy is difficult to determine. For the most part, Outer Gods appear to be concepts that pursue a certain thematic goal through the use of world-altering powers. Confirmed Outer Gods include the Formless Mother, the Scarlet Rot, and the Twin Bird God. Unconfirmed but likely Outer Gods include the Greater Will and Frenzied Flame. Possible but unlikely Outer Gods include the Full/the Dark Moon, the Fell God of the Fire Giants, and the Blood Star. Personally, I view the Outer Gods as semi-intelligent embodiments of certain concepts, although they rarely act with an actual design or goal, more so acting as a natural force of the world that seeks a certain end goal through the nature of their existence. First off, the Scarlet Rot. The Scarlet Rot is associated with unity, decay, rebirth, and personal detachment. The cycle of decay and rebirth, as Gowry calls it. The Scarlet Rot functions by breaking down living matter into fundamental and often fungal components, then restructuring them into extensions of itself, rot-based life such as the pest and fungal worshippers. In doing so, it creates a stagnant, unchanging ecosystem of constant death and rebirth. Next up, we have the Formless Mother. The Formless Mother is an Outer God associated with self-sacrifice, self-acceptance, and truth. The blood flame incantations associated with her involve wounding the invisible god herself and extracting her blood as a weapon. The Outer God of the Twin Bird has almost no information associated with it. All we can say for certain is that it sent the Twin Bird as an envoy, and the Twin Bird then mothered the Deathbirds. The Frenzied Flame is never specifically labeled an Outer God, but the fact that Miquella's unalloyed needle, explicitly designed to ward away the meddling of Outer Gods, expunges the Frenzied Flame's power, seems to implicate that the Frenzied Flame is an Outer God. The Frenzied Flame is associated with chaos, violence, nihilism, depression, and unity. The flame actually has an identifiable goal, which is to melt everything back into a singular form akin to the Crucible, where all life was once blended together. The Frenzied Flame seeks a solution to the mistake that is life. Those who worship the flame wish they were never born, and so seek a world where there will be no births and therefore no suffering or despair. The Greater Will is a very unusual case compared to the other Outer Gods. It has by far the most influence over the Lands Between, having sent down the titular Elden Ring and several pairs of fingers that can directly commune with and speak to the Greater Will. It may not be an Outer God, but something more. However, as the other Outer Gods are the closest comparison we have to it, I don't think one would be mistaken for assuming it falls under that umbrella. The Frenzied Flame even directly blames the Greater Will for the division of life from the Crucible. The Greater Will is associated almost exclusively with the concept of order. The specifics of this order don't seem to matter much, as long as this order is maintained. The history of the Lands Between is rife with conflict and change, but the agents of the Greater Will only move to alter the world if there is a threat of the order being upended, such as through the machinations of the Nox and worshippers of the moon and stars. Like the other Outer Gods, the Greater Will acts through a vassal. However, unlike the other Outer Gods, this vassal has a far greater impact on the lands between than any other we've seen. This vassal beast is the Elden Beast, the living incarnation of the concept of order and another form of the Elden Ring. Because of the Greater Will's absolute, nearly uncontested control over the lands between, its vassals and servants are almost untouchable. The Nooks, who we'll discuss later, had to craft specific ritual instruments to avoid the Greater Will's attention, and even then, they managed to draw the god's wrath. The Greater Will's chief instruments of communion are the two fingers, a pair of massive, disembodied fingers that writhe and wiggle as they commune with the Greater Will. The game claims that the Greater Will has abandoned the lands between, but the fingers claim otherwise.
A war leading to abandonment by the Greater Will.
That is, until they actually attempt to commune with the Greater Will when they freeze in place and cease their movements entirely. So, whether the Greater Will has abandoned the lands between or not, it certainly has lost interest in directly guiding the fate of this world. The Greater Will expresses its power in two ways that heavily influence the world of Elden Ring: runes and grace. The game tells us in straightforward terms that runes are still imbued with the power of life itself. Runes, like souls in the Dark Souls series, are simply the power of life and vitality, and can thus be used for a number of purposes. They directly correlate with one's power, and so more powerful foes will drop more runes. Indeed, those who earn the highest honor, dubbed heroes or lords, bear the largest runes in the land. The demigods, Marika's children, all received great runes upon the shattering, imbued with unique power and divine benediction. These great runes are also pieces of the shattered Elden Ring, which is itself made up of runes. Runes are vital to us because the Tarnished has, through their maiden, the unique ability to transform runes into strength, which we perceive as leveling up. So in essence, the golden power of life itself as devised by the Greater Will takes the form of runes. Runes are then conferred as blessings upon the mighty or used to empower the meek, making them mightier. Grace is a different, albeit closely related power, a more specific blessing that draws on the power of life found in such runes. The golden runes we find in-game are described as grace that dwells within the inhabitants of the lands between, the lingering traces of gold. If runes are the generic power of life, then grace is the formation of this generic power into an identifiable blessing. So when I say that more powerful individuals are blessed with more or larger runes, it might be more appropriate to say that they're blessed with more grace. Grace is significant to the Tarnished specifically because they're defined by their lack thereof. The term Tarnished is derived from the idea that the grace of gold which once shone in their eyes has faded or been tarnished. However, as the shattering drew on, this grace was returned to the Tarnished. Their returned grace also took the form of guidance, and the guidance of grace drew Tarnished back to the lands between from across the world. The guidance of grace takes the form of little rays of golden light which issue from sights of grace, themselves places where this grace confers to protect and benefit the Tarnished along their journey. All of this, according to Vare, is orchestrated by the two fingers, who as mentioned before are the vassals and interpreters of the Greater Will. Grace is also the power that allows Tarnished to return to life over and over again. The last little bit of preliminary information we have to discuss before we actually dig into this timeline is the geography and formation of the world itself. Elden Ring takes place within the lands between, a single massive land where presumably all life in this world originated from. However, there exists a world outside of the lands between. We hear of a few locations such as the Badlands and the Land of Reeds, all of which are influenced by the goings-on of the lands between, because therein dwells the Erdtree, the Elden Ring, and the god who orders these things. Likewise, the faith in the Erdtree and the Golden Order has been spread to these outer lands, though I doubt the influence of the Erdtree has nearly the same weight outside the lands between as it does within. So with all that said and done, I hope you have a very thorough understanding of the Outer Gods and what they are, because we're moving on to the first part of our chronological timeline, the Crucible and the formation of life within the lands between.